Hello, friends, and welcome to the new episode of I Don't Work Here, Lady. Today we have 3 more brand new stories. So if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss a new video every single day. Let's get started. You're a slight inconvenience to my day? Time to make you cry at work. So I work at a fairly well-known family clothing store. I've been there for about 5 months, and I'd like to regale you with the tale of the first lady that ever made me almost cry at work. Some necessary background: our credit/debit card machines have chip functionality for credit cards, but not debit. If you want to pay debit, you have to swipe your card, even if you have the chip. We're also required to check a card if the person is paying by credit and their total is over $50. If there's no signature on the card, we must see ID to run the card. A lady comes up to my register with her 2 kids and her mother. Her kids had already changed out of their old clothes and changed into the new ones, ripping off the tags and everything. Luckily, they kept the tags, and I rang everything up, read her the total, and asked if it'd be credit or debit. She said debit and tried to put her chip in until I explained our registers wouldn't read it and she'd have to swipe her card. She got all huffy and swiped it. Big deal, whatever. Her card declines. It must be your register. Try it again. Declined again. I asked if she had another form of payment. Nope. I then asked if she could pay credit with that card. She said yes. I checked it, only glancing at it long enough to see it's not signed, and that her first name began with an F and her last name began with an M. Relevant later. It normally only takes a moment for ID to be presented, and I usually still have the card in my hand when it is, so I don't pay that much attention. I asked to see her ID, and surprise, surprise, she doesn't have it. At this point, she is incredibly ticked off, because obviously her insufficient funds are my fault, so I call up the manager. Since it's the middle of Black Friday/holiday shopping bullcrappery busy times, it takes a minute. During this time, the lady and her mom are complaining about how none of this would be a problem if I'd let them just use the chip for their debit card, yada yada yada. I speak up and start saying, unfortunately, we have no control over that. The machines are only programmed to accept the chip for credit transactions. To which the lady replies, "Did I effing ask you a question?" I was shocked and fell quiet for a moment before saying, "No, but she," referring to her mother, was wondering. "Well then, talk to her. I'm not effing talking to you." I'm not good with confrontation, and am stressed out by how busy we are, and not having dealt with someone as rude as her before, I just nod and fall silent until the manager arrives. He finally arrives and explains it's store policy. There was nothing we could do. We needed to see some valid form of identification for her to run the card. She huffs and then tries to tell her son, who's wearing our unpaid-for merchandise, to go out to her car and see if her ID is there. At this point, the manager had walked off, so I was stuck telling her, "Ma'am, he's wearing our clothing, and it hasn't been paid for. He can't leave the store." "Well, I'm not leaving. He has to go. I'm not going anywhere." "Ma'am, he cannot leave wearing our merchandise unless it's been paid for." At this point, the woman's mother gets fed up and exclaims, "Okay, fine. I'll go then." She leaves and comes back, and that minute or so felt like the longest in my whole life. No ID was found, but a cell phone was produced, and the customer brought up a picture of her ID on the phone. I glanced at it, and this was my mistake. I saw that the initials matched, did not ask to see her credit card again, and just told her she was okay to swipe. I realized I should have verified it, but at this point I just wanted her to leave, so I didn't. Like I said, I shouldn't have done that. She proceeds with her transaction in silence until her receipt prints, to which she says, "I just have one question for you. What's my name?" At this point, I just want the floor to swallow me. My face is bright red and I stammer out the initials matched, but this was not happening. She calls the manager from before back over and tells him, "I just want you to know that she made me go through all this trouble to verify my ID for my card, and when I just asked her, she could not tell me what my name was." To his credit, he stood up for me and replied that it was his mistake for even allowing the credit card to be rung through without a physical ID present, and just in general stuck up for me. But as soon as she left, my other coworker, who was next to me this whole transaction, turns to me and says, "I'm so sorry." So yeah, being a stress crier, I almost broke down in front of my next customer before I was able to get off the registers for a moment to compose myself. Sorry this was so long. Just remember that retail turns everyone to the dark side after long enough. Soon you'll find pleasure in causing such people to take time out of their day to fix their own stupidity. The hate will flow through you, young Padawan. And our next story. 12 items or less. The story of Roid Rager from the early 90s. RR, Roid Rager. You know the type. Huge, twitchy, lived in the gym. GF, Roid Rager's trashy girlfriend who still had an 80s perm. OP, teenage grocery store cashier. AM, middle-aged, awesome manager who had handled many a Florida man. Unfortunately, I was in the express lane that day. We'd gotten word blasted down from National that secret shoppers reported people in the express lane with big orders. It was a valid complaint. They weren't putting enough cashiers on due to a cost-cutting measure instituted by the regional director, so lines were ridiculous. We'd been taking them on express when it was empty. Regardless, we now had strict instructions, no more than 20 items in the 12 or less lane. It could get you written up and hurt your raises or even result in termination if you got 3 inside some time period, I forget. The cashiers were responsible for keeping the register candy and magazines stocked and neat, also the front of store displays between the last register and produce. Those were the weekly big sale items, and this giant cardboard Kool-Aid monstrosity of doom that contained thousands of packets of heavily dyed citric acid and artificial flavor. Many a kid trashed that thing. It was the bane of our existence. So was the nightly fronting of the baby food aisle. But that's not relevant to this story. I just like to whine about fronting baby food. Those little jars are evil. GF and his very full cart hop into my express lane while an elderly lady is just finishing up her transaction. GF's whining to RR about the wait. She wants to go somewhere else. This is boring. He started to tell her to shut up. Then they got into a mild spat instead of putting things on the belt, so I let them be to finish the elderly lady's transaction. While I was with her, RR snapped at his GF, something about how they're checking out now and to stop being a B-word. As kindly as possible, I pointed out the 12 items or less sign and explained I wasn't permitted to check out anybody with more than a few over. Manager's orders. There were lanes open down the way. RR leaned over the counter at me, informed me loudly that he didn't have time to wait and listen to his girlfriend complain, and I would be checking him out immediately or else. I hit my panic button and flipped on my register light that automatically called the police and set off silent alarms in all the back areas of the store. He started slamming down his things on the belt as I attempted to explain that I had called a manager, but I could not ring up his things without approval. I could literally get fired for it. There'd been complaints. That's when RR really started to lose it, informed me quite loudly that he had a complaint too. Was his complaint less important than anybody else's? This went on with my parentage being called into question and stuff slamming on the counter so hard a couple things even opened. AM arrived running up from the back where he'd been dealing with a delivery issue. AM was not a small man, but RR was freaking huge. AM told me to go into his office, up half a level with half walls where you can see all the registers easy, and that he'd handle this. I fled. RR did not take that well. RR demanded that the C-word ring him up, not some pencil-neck suit. My manager was quite firm that nobody would be ringing him up and asked him to leave. RR lost it completely and started swearing, arm-waving, and knocking magazines off the display. The GF did not even cower at this like you'd think. She started whining about how long they'd already been there and how she didn't want to do it all over again. RR yelled something about being done with all this. He gave the still mostly full cart a mighty shove. It went careening down towards produce, straight into the giant Kool-Aid display, knocking the entire thing over and scattering hundreds of packets of Kool-Aid across all of produce. RR physically dragged his girlfriend out by the arm, and we never saw them again. About 15 minutes later, the cops showed up. Nice job on the panic button, guys. They took our reports and security footage, but nobody knew his name or anything useful. The parking lot cameras had bad coverage and hadn't seen anything helpful either. That was the one and only time I ever cried at work. It was terrifying. I also was closing. That display was my job to fix before I clocked out for the night. AM helped me, as did most of the rest of the staff once they were done with their areas, but it was a good hour and a half putting that cardboard display back together. It was a dented mess, and sorting hundreds and hundreds of Kool-Aid packets back into their correct slots. Then I still had to front the baby food. They helped with that too. By the next week, AM had told the district manager to pound sand and started putting enough cashiers on shifts. I'm guessing your panic button's like a robbery alarm? Where do you live that it took that long for cops to show up? And our last story, for dessert. The look on her face was priceless. This was back when I worked at a gas station. A lady came in looking for cigarettes. I asked for her ID and she said I don't need it because she's bought cigarettes there before. I tell her I've never seen her before, so unless I see her ID, she's not getting any cigarettes. She left to go to her car and look for it. She came back in without it, saying she must have left it at home, but she's 28, so can she please buy her cigarettes? That's great, but I still need your ID to prove it. She was PO'd and stormed out of the store. A few moments later, since I had no customers, I took the opportunity to bring a couple of garbage bags to the dumpster. People have a habit of parking on the side of the building I walk past to get to the dumpsters. There's a car parked there with the windows open. It's the lady from before. I can hear her as clear as day complaining about how I'm a B-word who doesn't know how to do my job, among other not-so-nice things. When I turn around, the passenger she was talking to sees me in the uniform shirt and signals her friend to shut up. The look on this woman's face when she realized I'd heard a ton of what she was saying about me was priceless. I'm confused. How can someone drive to a gas station and then not have ID? Hey guys, thank you all for watching the video to the end, and I'll see you in the next one.